on mental health and nutrition. A little housekeeping before we start. Q&A is closed right now, but we'll open up in about half an hour. Make sure to ask all content-related questions there and upvote on the questions you want to hear the answers for. If you have any CE, certification, or technical questions, please look to the FAQ page found in your event portal. I'll also be in the chat to help support you all over the next 3 days, so you have that resource as well. The slides can be found by clicking the handouts button under the live webinar tab in your event portal, and your attendance is automatically tracked through Zoom, so no need to worry about signing in. Now, let's get to why we're all here. Your amazing speaker has been a social worker for over 25 years. She received her Doctor of Science in Holistic Nutrition from Hawthorne University and is board certified in Holistic Nutrition through the National Association of Nutrition Professionals. She regularly integrates nutrition, mind-body exercises, and traditional psychotherapy methods to help her clients get on with living their lives optimally and enjoyably. She's an absolute pleasure to know and to learn from. Please help me welcome Dr. Vicki Steine.
Thank you, Hales. That was a nice introduction. And welcome, everybody. Happy to see everyone. So I need to do also a little bit of housekeeping. Welcome. I need to do a little housekeeping and talk a little bit about how we're going to manage this webinar, because we have so many people coming. It's going to be really hard for me to manage this in the way that I usually do. So we're going to use, as you guys are doing right now, the emojis as a way to communicate. And then, as Hale said, you've got the chat room for you guys to talk to each other. And we're going to, I love all these emojis. We're going to also use the Q&A so that you guys can ask me questions throughout the next 3 days. So the first thing I'd like to do is just welcome all of you again. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here for 3 days. I know that it's a big commitment, and I really appreciate you being here. So the first thing I want to talk about is we are, like I said, going to use the emojis. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you guys some questions and direct you specifically on which emojis to use, just so I can get an idea of who's here and where you're from. And then we'll start launching into some of this material. I also just want to say this is a long 3 days. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of information. So just what I'd like for people to do is really take care of yourself. When we're in a room together, I usually tell people that they can stand up and walk around. Obviously, you guys are all at home or in your offices listening to this. So you have the ability to move around as much as you need to. So please take break. We're going to take scheduled breaks, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But please, stand up, stretch, bring your knitting needlepoint, have your cats and dogs with you, whatever it is you need to do to stay grounded and present, because it is a lot of information, and I want you to take good care of yourselves. I want you to notice on this slide, you'll see my contact information. So I've got my email address and my phone number, which is my business phone as well as my personal phone. So if you want to reach me after the training, please feel free to reach out. I want to continue to be a resource for all of you. Like I said, there's a lot of information. It can be a little overwhelming on where to start and how you integrate this information into your practice. We're going to talk about that throughout the 3 days, but I frequently have people reach out to me afterwards, and I'm more than happy to help. Sometimes people reach out months later, so happy to answer questions and to guide you if I can. Okay, so I do want to talk about break times, because that's always important. And again, you guys are free to do what you need to do anyway, but we're going to take a formal 15-minute break in a couple of hours. So I'm on the East Coast. I'm in Atlanta. So I'm going to give you East Coast times, and then if you guys can just calculate where you are. So in 2 hours at 11, we'll take our first 15-minute break. And then we're going to break for lunch at 12:50. And that break is 1 hour and 10 minutes. So hopefully you'll have some time to maybe answer some emails or phone calls, maybe go for a short walk and get some fresh air. I would recommend that if you can. And then The afternoon breaks, I'm not exactly sure, but it'll be 2 hours in or a little over 2 hours in. And then we'll end I think we're ending at 5, but I have to double check that. I think it's 5 Eastern time. I'll double check that, but I'm sure you guys know. And also just know I am pretty almost on the money prompt with times, because we are working towards CEUs and the times are important. So if, when we take a break, you can just know that if you're running a few minutes late, I may have already started. So I just want to let you know, try to be on time. Okay, so we're going to start with just who's here. So if you would, whoever is here, are there any MDs here? If you are, do the hand clapping emoji. I don't know how long it takes for these things to come through. Okay, do we have any psychologists? Hand clapping. Okay, great. All right, fabulous. Social workers, heart emojis. Okay, wonderful. I love you. I don't know if y'all can see the screen like I can, but there's just tons of little hearts coming through and hands coming through. I love it. And then counselors, how about the one with the tears? I'm going to say they're laughing hard and crying, but not crying. Yeah, there we go. Okay, counselors. Wonderful. Okay. And have I got any nurses? Let's do fireworks for the nurses. Okay, great. Nurse practitioners? Any nurse practitioners? Oh, good. All right. Have I got any, I'm not sure if, let's do dietitians. Let's go back to hand clapping. Dietitians, nutritionists. Good. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. And I see when I'm in person, I can see who I missed. Who did I miss? OTs, PTs. No. Oh, okay. A couple. And maybe throw in the chat room, those of you that I missed, because I'll go back at the break and just come up to the top of the chat and just see who else is here. And I apologize if I missed any professions. Let's talk about how many people are, let's do thumbs up. Let's do thumbs up if you are in private practice. All right. So I love that because you guys, lots of you, good. Because you guys are in practice, you get to make your own decisions about how you practice. And so being able to implement a lot of this is easier in some ways. How about with the happy face? Let's see how many people work in nonprofits. Okay. So you guys, I'm thrilled that you're here. You may have a little bit more of an uphill road to climb when it comes to implementing. Just depends on your clinical setting and the director. Like I had somebody who was in my talk in Raleigh and she emailed me a week ago. And she said that her medical director was on board with all of this and they were going to be implementing a bunch of it, which is wonderful. Let's see how many people work in a hospital setting. Hearts. Okay, good. All right. How about fireworks? How about other institutions like prisons, schools, those kinds of places? Okay. All right. Wonderful. Okay. Good. So normally I will also ask, why are you here? What made you decide to choose this? And I'm going to just put out there that what I hear most is that people are looking for more than just medication for treating their clients, or their clients are asking for more than medication. And then some people are here because they have personal reasons, loved ones or themselves, and they want to know more about this topic. So I hope, and from from what I'm getting, the responses I'm getting, that sounds like that's spot on. Good. So I'm excited that you guys are here. And the more people that that we have doing this work, the more clients we reach rather. Because I think there is so much more to doing therapy than medication and just talk therapy. And so that's what we're going to be uncovering in the next few days. Today is, I'll just forewarn you, it's the most lecture. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of laying the groundwork for what we're going to talk about the next 2 days after today. So today, sit tight, lots of lecture, but going forward tomorrow and Friday, a lot more interaction. I mean, you and I can't obviously interact like we would with a smaller group, but I'm going to have activities for you to do. And on Friday in particular, I've got a couple of videos to show you. And we've also got some experiential things that we'll be doing. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. I can get the slides to go. There we go. So I'm going to just add a little bit more to Hale's beautiful introduction and just tell you a little bit more about my career and what brought me here. So I got my MSW in 1984 at the University of Georgia. And just so you know, I just turned 64 a week ago. So you don't have to do the math. I've been practicing for a really long time. Thank you. And I did work in addiction in inpatient and outpatient settings for the first 15 years. Thank you. And then I ended up working at a big local hospital. And in that hospital, I did addiction in that hospital, but then I moved into employee assistance work, which is very short-term work, and then training and development. And then took a break and out of our field and went and worked for my parents at a company called Georgia Spice Company, which will become relevant later in the next few days. And then after 9/11, I did some soul searching, as many of us probably did, and determined that really I didn't want to stay at Georgia Spice forever. I thought I did when I made the move, but once I was there, it wasn't really what I wanted. And so I went back to school during that time with as kind of an exit plan. And the idea was to get my doctorate in holistic nutrition and then move into a degree in practice of just nutrition. And I made that decision based on some personal experiences that I had had with food and how food had really transformed me first in a negative way and then in a positive way. So, but while I was studying and learning about nutrition from a functional perspective, which I will define for you guys in just a few minutes, I started thinking about all my clients who I had treated in addiction all those years and realized that we had really missed the boat on a lot of recovery, a big piece of what recovery should be about by not looking at nutrition. And so I just started thinking, I really can't leave my social work roots behind. So I decided that instead of just going into a nutrition career, making a complete switch, that I would do a combined switch. So I would ease out of Georgia Spice Company and back into social work with using this nutritional information as part of my practice and creating this integrative practice, which is what I've done. So that's what brings us here, so that I can share what I've learned and how I use these tools in my practice. And I want to say that from the start, this is another tool. It is not the only tool. So this is not saying that you should shed everything that you already know and do and switch over to something different. This is another piece that you get to put in your toolkit and you get to pull it out when you want to. So like, for example, yesterday I was meeting with a gentleman. I do a lot of work with car accidents because I'm part of a network of attorneys and chiropractors and other doctors. And I'm one of the few psychotherapy people in this network. And so I get a lot of people who have been in car accidents who can no longer drive because of their anxiety. And so I was meeting with this gentleman yesterday who I had met with in the fall last year, an older guy, one of those people that you don't expect to take to therapy that much because he's never done it before and he's already like in his late 60s. And he really enjoyed therapy. It seemed to help a lot. And then I got a call. I stopped seeing him in November. And I got a call from his attorney a couple of weeks ago saying he wanted to come back. And so I saw him yesterday for the first time since mid-November. And he's having trouble driving. He still is having trouble. He's still scared. And so he was coming to me saying, help me get back in my car, help me feel safe again. And so because I had this extended time with him, which I don't usually get with these people, I usually only get like 3 sessions, maybe 6. We talked about nutrition yesterday. And I had to do a lot of education with him because here's someone who is not driving, he's anxious, but he's also experiencing depression because he's not driving, he's isolating, he's not going out, he's not seeing his friends, he's not doing his volunteer work. So he's sitting at home, he's watching TV, and he's sleeping a lot. And so I said to him, I know today you want to talk about driving, but today we're going to talk about sleep and exercise and nutrition. And then I had to explain to him why. And we spent the whole time doing just that. So that was what I chose to do with him yesterday, where, in the fall, we just did psychotherapy. So again, I find a lot of times people start feeling overwhelmed with all of this information. And I just want to tell you, it's just another tool to start learning. And it's a lifetime of learning. The data on nutrition today is different than it was a year ago, and certainly different than it was 10 years ago. So it's always changing. You're going to continue to learn for the rest of your careers. So that's my little soapbox. So I do have a doctorate in holistic nutrition. You can see my other credentials here, my board certifications. So I'm going to move on so we can start learning together. I do want to state that there are materials in this course, interventions in this course that might be out of your scope of practice. And it's up to each and every one of you. Oh, I forgot to ask this question. I'll interrupt myself. Let's do hand clapping. I want to know just time zones. Let's just say who's on the East Coast? Hearts, Central, happy face, Rocky Mountains, whatever that is, mountain time, and fireworks for West Coast. Okay. And do I have anyone? Okay. Do I have anyone further out, like Hawaii? If you're in Hawaii, happy face, because you're probably happy being there. And international, like Canada, anywhere else that we've got people, how about more fireworks? Okay. Wow. Okay. So thank you guys for getting up early and making changes in your schedule to be here, because I know that all of that takes some additional effort. Okay, so with that being said, knowing that you guys are from all over, be aware that the materials that we use here may or may not be something you can use in your scope of practice. So I will mention that throughout the next 3 days, but it is your responsibility as a practitioner to find out what your scope of practice is. And I'll give you an example. In Georgia, the dietitians passed a law in 1984 that is very restrictive as to who can practice nutrition. And as a matter of fact, 14 years ago, when I first put my first website up, I had on my website that I did nutrition counseling because I'm a therapist and I do it. I didn't realize that was actually a term that I was misusing. And I got a call from the Secretary of State and I was asked to cease and desist. So I had to change the wording on my website and change how I speak about my practice. Now, if I went to Texas, so in Georgia, I can't call myself a nutritionist. I can say I'm a nutrition educator. If I go to Texas with my same exact credentials as today, I can call myself a nutritionist and I can practice the same way I'm practicing here, but I can use different terminology. So be sure that you check with your Secretary of State, check with your board, find out what you can and cannot do. And if we do talk about something that you can't do, it's an opportunity for you to partner with other people, which is what I do here. I have a network of functional doctors that I refer to and that they refer to me, so that we can do this work together. So just know what you can and cannot do. I also want to say that any people that I mention, any books that I mention, any trainings that I mention, I don't have any financial stake in anything. It's just information that I've accrued over time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about nutrition psychiatry, which is a relatively new field and a new term. And this is what we're going to really be exploring the next few days, along with some other lifestyle things that people might want to integrate in your practices. So we're going to talk about food, exercise, sleep, sunshine, screens, toxins, relationships. I lump all of that into that integrative model, but nutrition psychiatry is what we're going to talk about in the, right now. And looking at how the brain and the body are connected and how it is so important that what our clients are eating affects how it affects their mental health. So this was a paper that was written in 2022, and they are talking about nutrition psychiatry as the future of mental health. And they state that recently, even the American Psychiatric Association featured nutrition in the form of broad spectrum micronutrients, like clinical vitamins and minerals, as a viable treatment for mental health in their textbook, Complementary and Integrative Treatments in Psychiatric Practice. Which, when I first read this, I thought, woohoo, this is awesome. I still think it's awesome. But here's the only thing that I hope that we change at some point. I hope at some point this is not considered complementary treatment, but it is part of the mainstream treatment. That we don't think of it as, oh, we're going to do medication and we're going to do psychotherapy. Oh, and by the way, we should support the body by also doing this complementary stuff. I think that doctors should be prescribing nutrition. And if they don't know how to do nutrition, which many of them do not because they're just not trained, that part of their treatment plan is to refer to somebody like us, everyone who's here, who's going to be certified by the end of the 3 days, or at least have taken this training and be on their way to certification. So again, this is something that, as someone once said to me, it's like water on a stone. Like slow drops eventually is going to make a difference, but it does take time. One other thing I do want to say, we are covering a lot of slides over the next few days, and I get very excited about this topic. I'm really passionate about it because I really believe strongly this is the way that we should all be practicing therapy. So I tend to start talking a little fast. So if I am talking too fast, if somebody would either let Hales know in the chat room to ask me to slow down or somehow get word to me, I will make an effort to slow down again because I tend to speed up as we go along. Okay, nutritional psychiatry towards improving mental health by what you eat. This was something that was done, a paper that was done in 2019. And this is saying that the data suggests that what we eat matters, but that current research doesn't explain exactly how. So they say we conclude that an experimental medicine approach and a mechanistic understanding is required to provide solid evidence on which future policies on diet and nutrition for mental health can be based. So I just want to say science always takes longer to catch up to clinical work. So while we're doing this work in our practices, there are scientists out in the lab doing the studies to say, oh, when we give somebody fish oil, this is what happens to their brain, or this is what happens to their adrenal glands, or this is what happens to their mitochondria. That's all great, but I'm not waiting around for the data. I will add in the data as it comes. It certainly makes our case stronger, but usually science is about 17 years behind practice. So even though they don't know exactly how things work, we know that they do work. So I went to a conference a week ago Friday. It was the third annual conference on adolescence and complex cases that was done here in Atlanta. And it was a day-long conference. They had 3 speakers who were from Yale and Johns Hopkins, and I think 2 from Yale. These are like really smart people who are professors and practitioners. They're psychiatrists, and they were presenting complex cases, mostly a lot about Tourette's, but Tourette's and OCD and, all the neurological disorders. And I was really struck by the fact that, I won't say none, only one of them in the entire day talked about anything outside of medication. Everything that they presented was, here's this really challenging case. Here's the research on these meds. Here's what these meds do, how they interact with the body. And all of that is great. And I'm not against medication at all. There was one presenter who he was talking about Tourette's, and he was talking about and he's at Yale. He was talking about his research. And he actually mentioned traditional Chinese medicine and some herbs that they were using. He also talked about exercise and one other more holistic perspective, but nothing about nutrition. So when it was time for Q&A, I raised my hand and I said, I really appreciate you talking about TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and sleep, but have you done any work on nutrition? And he said to me, no, we haven't. We've done that work with ADHD, but not with Tourette's, but we need to. So 2 days ago, I reached out to him and I said, I'm the person that asked that question. If you ever should decide to do research on Tourette's and nutrition, I would love to be a part of that project, if that's at all possible. And he wrote me back and he said he would keep that in mind, but and this is why I'm telling you the story. This is why it's challenging. He said, it's really hard to do a nutrition study, to have a cohort large enough, the sample large enough for it to make a difference, and to figure out what you're doing. And like he said, even with the Chinese medicine research, they were having trouble getting approval from the Chinese company that was going to provide the herbal supplements. And he said, I'm not even sure that we're going to be able to make that happen. So there are practical challenges to doing the research that is needed for us to be able to back up what we're doing with the science. But we also I'm going to show you plenty of research. There's still plenty of research out there. And we all know from our own practices that what we're doing is working. Diet quality and depression. This was a review of dose response meta-analysis of prospective studies. And this was saying that there is evidence that a higher quality of diet is associated with a lower risk of onset of depression, but not all results are consistent. And you're going to see this all the way through, that there's just not consistent data on nutrition. But there's still enough that points us, I think, in that direction. This was looking at dietary recommendations for the prevention of depression. This was a study that was done in 2017, stating that there are gaps in the literature, but that there are practices that may reduce depression, and that we need to be mindful of the impact coming from a whole foods diet, not from a single nutrient. And I want to really emphasize that, because I think a lot of times the media will glob onto something that's come out and say, okay, we all need to do vitamin D, or we all need to do B12, or whatever that particular nutrient is. But what I'm going to show you over the next 3 days is that all these nutrients are connected to each other. And you can't just focus and target one particular thing. Occasionally you can, for a specific issue, you might want to go heavier in one nutrient or another. But for the most part, we're really looking at providing the body with an entire diverse diet and lots of different nutrients so the body has what it needs. This was looking at the association between adhering to the Mediterranean diet and the risk of depressive symptoms. This was from 2018, and they found that a higher adherence was associated with a lower incidence of depression. And they found it to be more so in men, and that we need more research for women. I'm going to show you a lot more information on the Mediterranean diet, I think on Friday. And this was looking at the impact of nutrients on mental health and well-being and insights into literature. And in this study, they looked at some specific nutrients. They looked at micro and macronutrients. And let me just define that for you quickly. Macronutrients are proteins, carbs, and fats. And micronutrients are the other nutrients, the vitamins and the trace minerals. So looking at the micros and macros, they looked at omega-3, vitamin E, magnesium, folic acid, and the impact these nutrients had on mental health with stress, with the stress being on stress, sleep disorders, anxiety, mild cognition impairment, and neuropsychiatric disorders. And they found that, and you can see in the red, overall data support a positive role for the nutrients mentioned above, the ones I just listed, in the preservation of normal brain function and mental well-being, although through the control of neuroinflammation, and encourage their integration in a well-balanced and varied diet, accompanied by a healthy lifestyle. I want to underline that because, like the gentleman that I was working with yesterday, it's not enough that I was asking him to eat 3 meals a day because he was only eating one, maybe, and then some junk food. And it's not enough that I asked him to walk to the cul-de-sac in his neighborhood, which is at the end of his driveway, and take a circle around. So now I've got him doing a little exercise. I've got him trying to eat a little better, hopefully. But also I need him to get out of the house. He needs to interact. He's used to being with other people and he's not. So it's the whole lifestyle. It's not just the food. People have to look at the entire picture, which is why we call it holistic. Okay, this is a dietary protein and amino acid intake looking at the maintenance of cognitive health. So this was a study that was looking at dementia and Alzheimer's. And we're still trying to figure out, of course, what causes those things and how do we stop it. So and I know this slide's kind of hard to read and I apologize, but I just took it straight from the study and I can't seem to change the colors, but you can see the cognitive positive and the negative. It's the same on the top and the bottom, but basically looking at if you lower anxiety, lower depression, exercise, get sleep, and get good nutrition and lower your stress, then your cognition is going to be better than if you don't do those things. And I'm reading a book right now called Brain Energy by Dr. Chris Palmer. And the whole book is about mitochondria. And I just read a whole section last night on neurotransmitters and mitochondria. And really, that seems to be, he makes a fantastic argument that all of these things, sleep, exercise, anxiety, depression, all of the things that we are trying to do ultimately impacts the mitochondria, and in impacting the mitochondria changes how the body responds, whether it's able to make neurotransmitters, whether we have hyperexcited cells that overwork and create things like mania, or they're hypo, where we're more depressed, or whether the mitochondria, whether the body responds appropriately to medication. So all of this goes a lot deeper into the biology. This was also more of the study saying that the causes of Alzheimer's and dementia are multifactorial and combine many different risk factors, including the sleep, exercise, and diet. And that there's limited evidence that links protein to cognitive decline, which of course was what this study was trying to look at, amino acids. I'm going to show you a lot of information on Friday on cognitive health and cognitive decline. One of the biggest things that seems to be impacting cognitive decline from a nutritional perspective is our ultra-processed food. And we'll get to that later. This was looking at diet and anxiety, and this was a review, and they found that the analysis revealed an association between people having less anxiety. This was from 2021, by the way. People had less anxiety if they ate more fruits and vegetables, omega-3 fatty acids, ate a healthy dietary pattern, caloric restriction, breakfast consumption, keto diet, broad spectrum micronutrient supplementation, zinc, magnesium, selenium, probiotics, and a range of phytochemicals. We're going to be covering all of these things in the next few days. The analysis also revealed that there was a higher level of anxiety with a high-fat diet, inadequate tryptophan, which comes from amino acids, protein, dietary protein, high intake of sugar and refined carbs, and unhealthy dietary patterns, which I will point out, this is what most of our clients are doing. This is what they're eating, and we'll talk about what that is and what that means in the next few days. This went on to say the caveat was that the results from this article were limited by a large percentage of research being done from animals and observational studies, which, as I told you from my little email exchange with Dr. Block at Yale, there's a reason why. It's hard to do these studies with humans. Only 10% of interventions involve participants with anxiety, limiting the applicability of the findings. So, and like most studies, more research is warranted. And then this one was continuing saying there's evidence of an association between healthy eating patterns and reduced anxiety symptoms. And I will be showing you more research along these same lines. So this is just sort of a preview of what our clients maybe should be eating. We're going to circle back to this and go into it in more detail. But what this article was recommending was following traditional dietary patterns like the Mediterranean, Norwegian, or Japanese diet, increasing consumptions of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes, increased consumption of omega-3 fatty acid foods, replace unhealthy foods with wholesome options, limit unprocessed foods and ultra-processed foods like fast foods and commercially produced foods, baked goods, and being mindful of the gut. And again, we will cover all of this. This was a review of some students, 45 students, and they looked at their diet quality and their ability to handle stress. And they found that the majority of students, 36 out of the 45, found that a good diet quality of students was associated with better mental health in terms of depression, anxiety, stress, and overall general mental well-being. Moreover, the majority of studies, 19 of the 23, found that stress and anxiety of students were associated with poor diet quality. So I want to just talk for a second about one of my clients, because I'm really proud of him because he falls into this group. He's a college student today. He's a sophomore, and I worked with him starting when he was in middle school, all the way through high school and into his freshman year of college. And he's one of these. I say this about all my clients. I love my clients. I love this kid. He was super bright, like off the chain bright. So straight A student. And he was also very creative. He had this really interesting mix, like he was very science oriented. He could do the math, he could do the science, but he also was very artistic and loved to create things and loved theater and started a podcast in high school. He's just sort of this really interesting kid. But he also struggled with food. That was one of his issues. He had ADHD and OCD, but also struggled with food. And so over the years, and particularly during the pandemic, he gained a lot of weight. And I hadn't seen him in person in a long time. And so didn't realize that he had grown to be like 6 feet tall, but he was extremely overweight because I always only saw him, from the shoulders up. And his face didn't really change all that much, maybe a little rounder, not much. So I didn't realize how much weight he had gained, but we were always talking about exercise and always talking about sleep. And, TikTok was an issue for him. He would take it off his phone, put it back on, take it off, put it on. But over the years, especially during the pandemic, we talked a lot about this stuff because his anxiety really spiked. So he would just wouldn't go. He had an issue with his body image because he had a stepfather who was a trainer, and the stepfather did a lot of shaming, body shaming for him. And so the kid didn't want to go outside and walk. He didn't want to do any exercise. He just wanted to do psychotherapy. Well, fast forward to his freshman year in college, he decided to start walking around campus. He ended up going to an inner city school. And so he wasn't, so he just was living there. And he said to me one day, he said, I was looking out my window and, I'm living in the city and there are all kinds of people out here. And there are people who walk around with their clothes not matching and they look like they haven't showered in a couple of days. He said, I don't really know why I'm worrying about people looking at me. I don't think anybody's caring about what I look like when I walk around. So I'm going to start walking to class, which is what he started to do. And then he started cooking for himself. He went to the dining hall some, but he also started cooking in his room more. And then later, he's in an apartment and he was able to cook even more. And then when he would go home and visit his mom, he had, there were walking paths near his mother's house that he was never willing to go on. But when he started making these changes, he decided to go. And so even on breaks, he would come home and he would go out and he would walk. He lost a ton of weight. He started taking, he was never on medication. He started taking ashwagandha, which we'll talk about later. It's an adaptogen for his anxiety and the exercise, and dropped all this weight. The anxiety got better. His OCD calmed down. Everything improved. And the end of his freshman year, he said to me, I don't think I need therapy anymore. So bittersweet for me because I love meeting with this kid. And he did come back in the fall last year just for a little check-in because he had a little something happening. But I haven't heard from him since. So my assumption is he's doing great. And so it was all about that entire lifestyle, implementing that entire lifestyle. And it took me, 5 years, 6 years to get him to finally start making those changes. So sometimes it's a slow road, but once they do it, once your clients start making those changes, the improvements are just remarkable. Nutrition and behavioral health disorders, depression and anxiety. So this was looking at 2021, looking at the healthy dietary patterns that meet food-based and nutrition recommendations may help reduce anxiety. And a healthy diet pattern will provide micronutrients like magnesium, zinc, and some vitamins like B, C, and E, and fatty acids. And again, we'll talk about all these nutrients in more detail in the next couple of days. So we're going to talk a little bit about the underlying factors of depression, anxiety, bipolar, and ADHD, looking at transcending the mind-body separation and understanding complex relationships. So this slide is referencing a meeting that Dr. Thomas Insill and Dr. Mark Hyman were having. They were having dinner together. They were at a National Institute of Mental Health meeting, I think. And they were talking about the DSM-4 at the time, which has now gone through another iteration plus. And what Dr. Insill said was that the DSM has 100% accuracy, but 0% validity, and that it provides a perfect way to describe symptoms, but it has nothing to tell us about the underlying biology of what causes them. And this is the crux of what we're talking about over the next few days. The DSM was never really intended to be used the way that we're using it. It was originally made just to create some definition, but it ended up becoming something more, where now we have all these codes and we use these codes for reimbursement and we go by these descriptions. But we have to think about how that doesn't really work. Because I could have, 5 different people in my office with anxiety, or 5 different people in my office who tell me that they have depression. So number one, first problem that we have as practitioners is we go by self-report. So I have a client who comes in and they tell me that they are having trouble sleeping and they're having trouble going, like this gentleman I worked with yesterday, trouble sleeping, isolating, don't want to get out of bed, maybe goes to work, but then comes right back home, crying all the time, no appetite. We're going to look at the DSM and we're going to say depression. And we're not wrong. They are having some sort of a mood issue, clearly, but we might go straight to, well, why don't I send you to a psychiatrist and we'll put you on some medication and we'll help you to feel better. But what if their depression is something else? What if it's because they have a deficiency in some kind of nutrient? Or what if it's just that they're not sleeping and so they're irritable and that looks like depression? Or maybe they've got some sort of major stressor going on and it's causing them to feel depressed. There can be so many reasons of why somebody feels depressed. So the DSM is accurate, but it does not tell us what's going on, and it doesn't tell us what the biology is. And so we have to ask more questions and we have to understand what's causing that. And if you read Dr. Palmer's book, Brain Energy, he is a psychiatrist and he does medicate. And he says, he does believe medication can be helpful, and I do too, but also we need to understand what the biology is, because maybe we can give somebody less medication because all medication has side effects. Let's give them a little less medication or support the efficacy of the medication by making sure that the client gets all the nutrients that they need. Like I've got a kid that I'm working with now. He has OCD and ADHD, and he's on a host of medications for his OCD, which is doing a beautiful job. The kid really suffered, and I got him to a doctor that just really did a really great job medicating him. And I just lost my train of thought. He's also on Deplin. So Deplin is folate. It's the prescription form of folate, which we'll talk about later, which can help medication be more efficient. And my kid's not taking it. He just keeps forgetting. It's his ADHD and his teenageness. He's such a teenager right now. And so the medication sits out on the kitchen counter. He goes upstairs. He's supposed to take it at night. He's supposed to take it with food. He forgets. And so I did a lot of education with him a few weeks ago to just explain to him, this is why that medication is important. It's not just another pill. It's a pill that helps the other medication work better. And I was hoping if I gave him a little education, that would help. I'm not sure yet. I didn't meet with him yesterday, so I don't know yet if it did or not. We'll see. But the other thing that Dr. Insel says, he said in 2017, and I find this quote fascinating. He says, I spent 13 years at NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, really pushing on the neuroscience and genetics of mental disorders. And when I look back on that, I realized that while I think I succeeded in getting a lot of really cool papers published by cool scientists at a fairly large cost, I think about $20 billion, I don't think we moved the needle in reducing suicide, reducing hospitalizations, improving recovery for the tens of millions of people who have mental illness. So that really says a lot, that we still really don't know what we're dealing with on so many levels and how to fix it. And it's just getting worse. We're seeing more and more people suffering. Hang on. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I want to talk about the difference between the medical model and functional medicine and the whole client. So in the medical model, we break the body down into parts. So we've got, our bones, our skeletal, we've got our heart, we've got our lungs, and on, right? So like if you might go to your GP and say, this is what's bothering me. And then your GP is going to say, okay, well, I'm going to refer you to a cardiologist, or I'm going to refer you to a GI guy. And so we break up the body into different parts. And even when we go to some doctors, they break us down into even smaller parts, right? Like I was having some knee issues. So I went to go see the orthopedist. And I have one of my oldest friends, excuse me. One of my oldest friends is an orthopedist, and he's retired now. But when I used to go and see him, this was in the old days when doctors weren't part of big hospitals and they had their own private practices, and that was their business. So I would go to him and, I'd tell him, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. And he would say, okay, let me get a couple x-rays and then we'll figure out what's going on. And so we would do it, and I would do everything in his office, and he would treat me for whatever I walked in the door with. So when he retired, he sent me to this other practice. So I go to the practice, and I went because my knee was bothering me. Talking to the doctor, we did the x-ray thing. And I said, oh, and by the way, as long as I'm here, hip, shoulder, still need to have that looked at too. And he said, well, I don't do that. He said, you're going to have to make an appointment with the hip doctor, and you're going to have to make an appointment with shoulder doctor, and you'll have to come back to get those doctors to take a look at those parts. So we break our bodies down, sometimes even smaller parts. And I don't know if those doctors even talk to each other in the same practice. I assume they do, but you know what they say about making assumptions. So that's what the medical model does. It breaks the body down. And then when it comes to diagnosis, there's a little rhyme that I did not make up that says that we name it when we're looking at some sort of a symptom or a disease. We name it, we blame it, and then we try and tame it. And that's what traditional medicine typically will do. So it's going to name what's going on. It's going to blame all the symptoms with that one thing, and then try and tame it. And typically, a lot of times we're taming symptoms, not necessarily always taming the actual thing. And that's, of course, an overstatement. It's not always the case. I do want to pause here and say, I have nothing against the medical model. And I'm forever grateful to modern medicine for the work that they do. My son is an anesthesiologist. I see the kind of work that he does every day. I was in a near fatal boating accident 14 years ago. And if it wasn't for modern medicine, I would not be sitting here in front of you today. That is 100%, I'm certain I would have died. So there is a really great place for the medical model. We're great at acute care. We are not great at long-term health care. We are good at treating things as they pop up, but we are not great at preventative healthcare. But that's where functional medicine comes into play. So functional medicine looks at the root causes and looks at the biology and looks at the fact that every single person is different. So we don't lump everybody together into groups like modern medicine does. So functional medicine is personalized. It is usually, it is not, like when you go to a Western medicine doctor, they don't have a lot of time. It's not their fault. It's just the way the system is set up. They want to find out what's going on. They want to treat you quickly and get you moving out of the office. And I think that has trained us to have an expectation that we're going to them for them to fix us. So, hey, doc, give me a prescription and let me feel better, or do some surgery and I'll feel better. Whatever it is, I want you to fix me. Functional medicine is more about the doctor helping you fix you. So it's more about this long-term personalized care where the patient has to take some responsibility for their health. So it's predictive, it's preventative, it's personalized, and it's participatory. So it's a little bit different. And one of my favorite stories about how this played out for me in my world was with two different doctors that I worked with. So when the Affordable Care Act first came into being, I was just going into private practice and needed to find my own health care. because I was self-employed. And so I started out at Kaiser Permanente, which I really, I liked. They're an HMO. And so one of the ways they keep costs down is that you have to use their doctors, which was fine. So I went to set up my chart, and I'm meeting with the GP, and he's, typing away, asking me questions. And he said, so are you on any medication? And I said, I'm taking hormone replacement therapy. So yes. And he said, oh, okay, well, what are the doses that, for your HRT? And so I told him, and he stopped typing, and he looked at me and he said, well, I don't even have that listed I don't have those doses in my system. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. Well, the reason is because I go to my doctor who takes my blood, and she sends my results. She creates my own dosing based on my blood work to a compound pharmacy, and then they make the medication for me. And he said, oh, well, I don't have any way to put that in the system. And the reason that he didn't have any way to put it in the system is because at Kaiser, and not just Kaiser, but, in general, but Kaiser specifically had their own pharmacy. So you would see your doctor. This was so convenient. I actually loved it. See your doctor in the, one room, and then literally walk across the hall to their pharmacy, and they would fill your prescription on the spot. So that was, convenient and cost effective. But the problem was that instead of it being specific to each woman who needed HRT, then each prescription was based on an aggregate. So a woman who's 50 to 55 who had this particular blood work, this is the medication that you get. From 56 to 60, this is the medication that you get, and so on. So it wasn't personalized. It was just an average. Which is fine, and and it works for a lot of people, but that wasn't I still use a compound pharmacy, and my doctor changes my prescription pretty much every time. I go and visit her twice a year. She does blood work, and she tweaks my prescription every single time, which just tells me the body is constantly changing, and so that's what functional medicine is looking at: is that personalized medication, that personalized therapies that is based specifically on what each individual needs. Functional medicine also believes that N equals 1. So when we look at all these research studies in the next few days, and we're looking at these huge cohorts of people, at the end of the day, N equals 1. So, I'll get people asking a lot of questions and they'll say, well, but this happens to my mother, or this happens to me, or what about this, and what about that? Again, it goes back to N equals 1. And so we're going to talk in generalities over the next few days, but when it comes to actually treating your clients, you have to keep this in mind. You have to keep in mind N equals 1, and that what works for one is not going to work for another for a myriad of reasons. So we're looking at our genetic makeup, we're looking at the external environment, and we're looking at the internal environment. So the genetic makeup, you all know what our genes are. What you may or may not realize is that our genes get turned on and get turned off, depending on what we are exposed to or what we are not exposed to. And so just because we have a certain genetic makeup doesn't mean that certain things are going to happen to us or not happen to us. It may mean that we're predisposed, but it doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. And we'll talk about that later. The external environment is everything. It is all the input we have. It's all the toxins that we come in contact with. It's the relationships that we have. It's the amount of education that we have. It's whether we have pets or not. It's whether we're divorced or married or not, or what it's just every single thing that we come in contact with. That is our external environment that all can have an impact on our genetic makeup and about our chemical biology. And then also our internal environment. And that means whether genes are turned on or off, whether our mitochondria is working properly, whether we have inflammation. whether we have certain genetic SNPs that interfere with our ability to use medication, and so on. So there are a lot of reasons that we can have imbalances that can become mental health issues. And we'll talk about a lot of these as we go through the next 3 days. So I'll talk a little bit beyond pharmaceutical management, because that's part of why you guys are all here, right? Looking for answers besides medication. And again, medication is fine. I've got probably almost all my clients are on some meds. I have one client who's titrating off right now. She's doing remarkably well. The last time that she tried to do this, she did not do well at all. So I'll talk about her later, I think. So Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, he said that for every drug that benefits a patient, there is a natural substance that can achieve the same effect. And he called that Pfeiffer's Law. And he used a lot of research to treat schizophrenia, people with schizophrenia, using vitamins and minerals. And when I graduated from my program, I believed this with my heart and soul. I still do. But I also know that a lot of our clients also need medication. And we don't often have the luxury of using just nutrition and tweaking supplements forever to get people to a better place. Sometimes they need relief pretty quickly, and some medication can be really helpful. Dr. Weston Price, he was a dentist, and he did some amazing work. You can look and see his 11 principles. I just went and looked at it because I'm going to add a slide that actually spells out what his 11 principles are. So because I just looked at it, I'll see how much of it I can remember. But he basically is talking, his 11 principles include fermented foods, organ meats, eating a lot of meat, eating whole foods, staying away from processed foods. And I can't remember the other 6, but you got the idea. But let me talk a little bit about him. He wrote this book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, in 1939. And he and his wife traveled all over the world looking at what indigenous people were eating in their indigenous environments. So he went and he looked at the Inuits, he looked at people living in tropical environments, he looked at people living in mountain areas who didn't have access to the water. And he studied what they were eating. And because he was a dentist, he was interested in their mouths. He was looking at their dental caries, whether they had cavities or not. And what he discovered was that people who ate the way that their ancestors had always eaten in whatever part of the world they were living in, they had their teeth were really wide set. Their mouths were wide open and wide set, which allowed for the teeth to fit comfortably in their mouths. They held onto their teeth for their entire lifetime. Their nostrils were wide set so that they could breathe easier. He got interested in people's skeletons as well. And so he also started noting things like height, like people who were eating the way their ancestors did were tall, usually lean. Women's hips were wide so that they could easily birth babies. But what he noticed was as soon as Western food, like white flour and white sugar, was introduced into people's diets, he started observing a degeneration. And so people's teeth were crowded. He started observing things like cleft lip and cleft palate. He found club foot. Women's hips, their hip bones started to narrow, making it more difficult to have babies. Nostrils narrow, so more difficult to breathe, and so on. And what he did was, first of all, he financed all this research, so there was no conflict of interest, which I thought was pretty amazing. But also he documented everything with pictures. So if you pick up a copy of his book, it's a long book. It's interesting. I read it cover to cover. The print's a little bit tiny, but the the pictures tell everything. The pictures tell the whole, because part of what he did was really cool. Like he would take a family. So he had grandfather, father, son, and he would put them next to each other. And so you could see the degeneration from one generation to the next. Because here's the thing, and we're going to talk about this with genetics. Grandpa has certain genetics that he passed on to Papa. Papa passes those genes on to son. Now, of course, there are women involved, and so the genetic makeup changes from one generation to the next. But if Papa ate white bread, white sugar, white stuff, white ultra-processed food, and turned on some specific genes or turned off some genes, and then had son, those genes that were changed get passed on to the child. So it's not the original genes that came from grandpa. It is the chain, or Papa, it's the genes that were genetic, that were changed, that were then passed on to the son. And so you see this degeneration as those genes are being impacted. So it's fascinating work. And then he came up with these principles, and you can still go online. You go to this website, the Western Price Foundation. There's still people practicing what he teaches. I actually went to a meetup years ago. There was a group here in Atlanta. These were all relatively new moms who were talking about cod liver oil and raw milk and fermented foods, and really eating a healthy, unprocessed diet and providing that for their kids. So Dr. Abram Hoffer, another pioneer, he worked with vitamin B3. He worked with vitamin C. He also worked with alcoholics, treating them for alcoholism, depression, and anxiety. Dr. Linus Pauling was a physicist and chemist and the founder of molecular biology, and he coined the term orthomolecular biology. And he proposed that mental abnormalities might be successfully treated by correcting imbalances or deficiencies, notably vitamins and other micronutrients. He was also responsible, he's the person who discovered that if you take vitamin C when you are getting sick with the common cold, that can help to speed up your recovery. There are also lots of other people out there these are the pioneers. There are other people who have been also paving the way for us, who are still practicing. And I've got later on in the PowerPoint, I have a list of a lot of those people so that you can have access to those people and look them up. In the old days when we did this training and we did it in person, everybody would get a paper packet that you would get to take home. And so when I created this training originally years ago, I tried to create the packet so that you could take it home and it would be a resource for you. Now, of course, you get the PowerPoint. So I tried to create in the PowerPoint, and you'll see, and I'll point out, slides that are specifically as reference slides so that you can come back and look at that. And again, I'm always available. But some of the other people that I'll just mention, but you have them in this list that I'm going to provide for you later. Julie Matthews has a book called Nourishing Hope. She does a lot of work with autism. And so she's still practicing. You can follow her blogging. Andrea Nakayama, she has a Functional Nutrition Alliance where she also does a lot of coaching and training. Dr. James Greenblatt, Kathy Swift, Sheila Dean, there's a whole bunch of people, Tom O'Brien. I'm going to mention them throughout the training, but again, you'll have a list of some of these other people that you might want to follow who can help you as you continue your journey in functional medicine. So this was a study that came out a couple of years ago, 2019. And I remember when it came out because everybody was like, oh my gosh, it's the first time that functional medicine was seen as something that could be helpful in mainstream medicine. Because up until then, if you looked up people who were doing functional medicine practice, like if you Googled them, you would see all kinds of really negative press about them, like social media comments like, oh, this person is a quack and this person doesn't know what they're doing and there's no research that supports this. So here it was a research paper that was printed in JAMA. So it was, that's like, the Journal of Medicine is, the premier journal. So they did a study where they had a little over 7,000 people, and they followed these people for a year, and they had half the group essentially was at, well, not even half. Some of the group, 1595, you can see, was at the Functional Medicine Center getting medical care. And then the other group, the larger group, was at the Family Health Center. And what they found was when they checked at 6 months, the people who were getting functionally treated were doing better than the people at the Family Health Center. However, at the end of 12 months, the Family Health Center had basically caught up, and the people were doing equally well at the Family Health Center as they were at the Functional Medicine Center. So the conclusion was that the findings of this study suggest that functional medicine may have the ability to improve global health in patients. So again, this was a really big, finally tipping their hat to the fact that functional medicine is a viable way of treating our clients. Okay, we're going to talk just for a second about understanding the brain. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to make sure everybody is on the same page when it comes to the brain. So the frontal lobe is where we have voluntary movement, executive function, and expressive language. This is the part of the brain that most of us are dealing with during, when we're dealing with our clients, working with our clients. And this is a place where a lot of our clients struggle, particularly executive function, at least mine do. Temporal lobe is creating, preserving conscious and long-term memory. It also plays a role in visual and sound processing. It's crucial for object recognition and language recognition. And the brainstem, without it, we would not be here. It regulates heart rate, breathing, eating, and sleeping. And the cerebellum is responsible for movement and balance. It also can play a role in cognitive functions like language and attention. The occipital lobe is for visual processing. The parietal lobe is sensory perception and integration. And the cerebral cortex is the control and information processing center. And then we have these neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that speak either neuron to neuron or neuron to muscle. And they communicate across the synapse to other neurons, a muscle, or a gland. And this little space here that you see is the synapse, and information goes down the neuron. It comes into this little space and then connects on these receptor sites. And then if there's anything left over, then that gets sucked back up and recycled, which is the uptake, the reuptake. And so like if you have a client who's on SSRI, then this reuptake is inhibited so that the serotonin stays in this synapse and continues to hit on those receptor sites, basically tricking the body into thinking that there's more serotonin there than there actually is. And like I said, I was reading about mitochondria last night. Yes, at 11 o'clock last night, I'm reading about mitochondria, neurotransmitters. And it was talking about the impact that these neurotransmitters also have on mitochondria and what the impact that mitochondria have on those neurotransmitters. So we'll talk more about neurotransmitters now and again later. There are different kinds. We have excitatory neurotransmitters like epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, glutamate, excuse me, and phenylethyl. I can never pronounce this, so I'm just going to call it PEA, which is what most people call it. It is excitatory neurotransmitters keep us awake and they give us energy. Inhibitory neurotransmitters are things like GABA, serotonin, 5-HT1AA, and taurine. These are the ones that help us to be calm. So once we are excited and maybe in the fight or flight response, for example, we need GABA to help us to feel calm again. And then the modulating neurotransmitters, these influence the effects of other chemical messengers. And they are things like acetylcholine, dopamine, histamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So epinephrine and norepinephrine, the fight or flight response, very helpful when we are in our survival mode. Not so helpful when we stay in that chronic fight or flight response. And we all see that all the time with our clients, particularly our clients who suffer from anxiety. And dopamine helps with the with neuromodulation, like motor control, motivation. It's our reward center. So it makes us want to do more of whatever it is that we like. It helps us with our maternal and reproductive behaviors. It's the thing that is getting kicked off when people are watching video games, having a good meal, enjoying sex. All those are activities that get that dopamine going and make us want to do more of that. Glutamate is an important neurotransmitter. It's present in over 90% of all of our brain synapses. It's a naturally occurring molecule that sends signals to other cells in the central nervous system. It can be excitatory, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. PEA is an essential amino acid, and it comes from essential amino acids, and it helps to form norepinephrine, and it helps signals travel between the brain and the body's nerve cells, and maintaining an awake or alert state. It also helps us to improve our memory. It helps reduce hunger pains, and it has antidepressant properties. People who have PKU, which is a disorder where they are unable to break down PEA into tyrosine, can get sick when they consume PEA. And that's important because you will see on some supplements, you'll see where PEA is included. And so clients will need to know, and you might need to know if somebody has PKU, because then they should not be consuming PEA. Serotonin is the happy drug, the happy chemical. And we all know, like, that's what makes us feel happy. It's also has a role in things like mood. You already know mood, sleep, digestion, nausea, wound healing, bone health, blood clotting, and sexual desire. So if it's too high or it's too low, it can cause physical and psychological health problems. Low serotonin, as we all know, is associated with depression. Just a fun fact, 90% of serotonin is actually made in the gut. We'll talk about this more. 10% is in the brain. It goes to the brain, but it is manufactured in the gut. And that's important. Taurine is an inhibitory neuromodulatory amino acid. And we get that from meat, eggs, and fish. So this is one of the sections I'm going to go through fairly quickly, because this is one of the sections that is really more for your reference than it is that we're going to talk about in detail right now. I keep moving this section. I've put it in the end. I've put it in the middle. But whatever, I want you guys to have it. So looking at the different deficiencies that can come with with attention deficit disorder, vitamin D, iron, glutamine, choline, and methyl tetrahydrate folate, which we'll talk about also later. And zinc, just a little FYI about zinc. Zinc can affect how people experience taste. So if you are working with kids in particular, but I have adults who are picky eaters too, but kids who are picky eaters, it might be that the food doesn't taste right to them. And so it could be because of they may be low in zinc. One of the ways that you can tell that somebody is low in zinc is if you look at their fingernails. So if they've got those horizontal white lines on their fingernails, that could, doesn't always, but it could indicate that they have a deficiency in zinc. You can also buy something called zinc tally, Tally. I believe it's from a company called Metagenics. And your client, I used to do this in my office a lot when I worked with I don't work with as many kids with ADHD, little ones anymore, like I used to, because I switched my work office. But I used to keep the zinc tally in my office, and I would have the little cups, the little paper cups like you get at the dentist's office to do your swishing. And back in the day when they did that, now they don't do that, but those little paper cups. And I would pour a little zinc tally in 3 cups, one for me, one for the parent, and one for the kid. And we would just put it in our mouths and swish it around. And if you have no taste or a delayed taste, it means that you are deficient in zinc. But if you taste it, or I would get like this fuzzy feeling on my tongue, if you taste it, then that would indicate that you did not have a deficiency. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're working with people with ADHD. Also having copper a little bit is good. Too much can cause mood issues and symptoms like hyperactivity, impulsivity, and aggressiveness. And it can cause stimulant meds to make the child worse. So the zinc and copper should have a proper ratio to each other. There should be 1 part copper to 8 parts of zinc. Other deficiencies, lithium. And when I talk about lithium, I'm not talking about high doses like you would give to somebody with bipolar, but low dose lithium, 5 to 10 milligrams. If people are low in lithium, we might see irritability, anger, and aggression. We used to always get lithium. We had lithium in our water. It was in the earth. So it would trickle into our water tables and we would drink lithium. But now that we all drink bottled water and other things that come in bottles, we're not getting, a lot of people are not getting enough lithium. So supplementing with a low dose. So I supplement with lithium orotate, ORTATE, lithium orotate. I take 10 milligrams a day because it also can help with brain health and cognition. And as I'm aging, that becomes very important. I had a client years ago, had a kid that I was working with. Well, he was really a young adult, not really a kid. He was a young adult. And he was dating this woman. And he said, I think she might be the one. I really like her. And he said, but I kind of don't like the way I'm a little too quick to get angry. I'm a little irritable. And I don't like that about myself when I'm with her. And I don't want that to drive her away. So we were going to work on that from a psychotherapy perspective, but also I suggested that he might want to try taking some lithium, which he did, and it helped. So he saw a huge difference in his ability to manage himself. Magnesium, we'll talk about later also, but you can see this list of things. And omega-3s and serine, which is another fatty acid. Let me just give you a definition. When we talk about essential fatty acids or essential amino acids versus just regular amino acids or regular fatty acids, essential means that our body needs it, that we really have to have it to function properly, but that we have to have it, but we can't, our bodies can't make it. And so a lot of nutrients will provide the building blocks for the things that we need to have. But if it's essential, it means that we have to have it to operate optimally, but that our body can't make it. And so we must consume it in order to have enough of it. So there are essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. Anxiety, you can see this is part of what we might be deficient in. These are some other deficiencies and or things that can impact anxiety, like candida, which we'll talk about probably on Friday, and things like excess caffeine and sugar. These are some other things that can cause, can be a part of anxiety and impact people who have anxiety. And these are some other things as well. We'll talk about all of these to some extent, except for the first one, the pyroluria. We're only going to talk about that right now. It's a genetic disorder that where people have a high amount of pyroles. These are a byproduct of hemoglobin synthesis and we don't know what they're used for, but they bind to B6 and zinc and can contribute to anxiety, ADHD, addiction, irritability, and depression. But that's too deep into issues that we're not going to have time to get to in the next 3 days. Bipolar, GABA, parts of the brain that are affected. These are potential deficiencies that one might have with bipolar. So you can see it's a pretty long list. And those references. Depression, this is the part of the brain, and contributing factors. Atopy is a tendency towards allergies, asthma, and inflammation. Dental caries, hormones, obesity, omega-3, physical inactivity, poor diet, psychosocial stressors, and a sedentary lifestyle. Sleep issues, smoking, thyroid. And these are potential deficiencies with depression. And OCD and ODD. Just a moment about ODD. I don't use that definition or diagnosis very often. I find that, and the clinic that I used to work at, we never used it. Even though clients would come to us with that diagnosis, the belief was that there's something going on with that kid. There's something that's irritating them so that they don't have the words to describe what's happening. And so what looks like meltdown, well, they are having meltdowns. It looks like bad behavior, that they're not trying to be naughty. They just don't have a way of communicating. So I see I'm getting some positive response from that. So other people are on the same page with me. So glad to hear that. I have a friend my friend who's married to the orthopedist. She and her husband retired up in Cashiers, which is a beautiful retirement community in the North Carolina mountains. And she decided to be a big sister. And so as part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program, and she took on this little girl. And my girlfriend was going to, save this little girl. And unfortunately, the story does not have a really happy ending. But the interesting thing to me about this kid was, and I never met her, but my friend would talk about her a lot. When she was with my girlfriend, she was a complete angel. And my girlfriend and her husband are two of the kindest people you could ever meet in the world. And they just showered her with love. And they would read stories to her, and they would help her with her homework. And she wasn't supposed to spend the night, but she'd let them spend the night. They'd let her spend the night, and made sure that she was clean and had showers and all that kind of stuff, because her home life was terrible. Her home life, she lived in a trailer. One of her parents, I can't remember which one of her parents was in prison for drug dealing, and the other parent was addicted. Grandparents were raising her. They were all living together. She did not have a bed. She slept on a couch. And then she'd go to school. And so in school, she was acting out. And so my girlfriend got involved with the school and with the family. And it was just interesting that to me, that when she was with my girlfriend and she was treated with love and kindness, she was respectful and fine. But when she was at home and when she was at school, meltdowns and the bad behavior and the acting out and the throwing things was just, out of control. So, we would diagnose ODD if we were going to go by that. But I think it really was more of a frustration that she wasn't getting what she needed. Potential deficiencies with OCD. These are some of the things. And we will cover a lot of these in the next few days. Nutritional therapies for mental disorders. This was a nice summary from 2008, where they said that notably essential vitamins, minerals, and omega-3 fatty acids are often deficient in the general population in America and other developed countries, and are exceptionally deficient in patients suffering from mental disorders. And that we should be supplements that contain amino acids also can reduce symptoms, and it may be appropriate for controlling major depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and anxiety disorders, eating disorders, attention deficit and hyperactivity, and addiction and autism. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what kinds of dietary interventions we might have access to. So we're going to talk about elimination diets. That means in any elimination diet, we are literally eliminating something. So we're going to be eliminating something for a period of time, most likely, and then hopefully adding it back in. But first, let's talk about what our clients are eating. Our clients are eating the standard American diet or the modern American diet. So the SAD diet or the MAD diet. And you can see that acronym. This is a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. So for breakfast, people will eat things like toast, bagels, cereal, donuts, muffins, waffles, pancakes. I don't really know why and how it came to be that we thought that breakfast should be like dessert and that we would eat all this kind of sweet stuff. Lunch, we tend to eat things like sandwiches, pasta, croutons, and then, whatever protein that goes with that. For dinner, bread, pasta, pizza. Snacks are going to be things like cookies, cakes, crackers, pretzels, snack bars. And then we also have meat as high as the center of the plate, processed foods and simple carbs, and low in healthy fats, fruits, and vegetables. So that's the standard American diet. This is the diet that we want to help our clients move away from. And we'll talk a little bit more about, a lot more about what we want our clients to be eating. So just in terms of looking at how do we apply nutrition to nutritional psychiatry, before we talk about an elimination diet, we need to understand what our client is currently eating. So we want to assess what their current nutrition is and what their dietary intake is. And look for, and when I do this with my clients, I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for deficiencies, like maybe they don't eat any dark green leafy vegetables, or maybe they're not eating healthy fats, or maybe they're not eating. Like the gentleman I was working with yesterday, he said all day, I met with him, I think at 5 or 6, I think I met with him at 5. The only thing he had eaten all day was a sandwich. It's just not enough nutrition, just not. So looking at what they're doing, how often they're doing it, determine if further referring needs to be done or testing needs to be done. I had a 3-year-old that was referred to me last week, and I don't work with kids that young. And in Georgia, I'm not allowed to do testing, but this mom called me and she said, I got referred to you for nutrition. My kid was just diagnosed with autism, and I want to do whatever I can. And so I said, the first thing I said to her was, you've got to get him some testing. We need to know what his nutritional status is. I can't do that work. So I referred him to another practice that I refer to frequently for that. So she wrote me back and said she'd already made the appointment. So they'll get the testing done. They'll understand what his needs are, and then she can start introducing the nutrients. So I have the client fill out a food diary. I have most of my clients today would rather just fill it out on their phone. Like there are tons of apps to help people to track what they're eating. But I'll show you some food diaries that I have also used in the past, that for some people, they still like to put pen to paper, and they can use that too. I personally like the food diary on paper because then I can kind of get a good visual, but I want to do whatever's easiest for my client and collect the data however we can. So again, looking at patterns, what's there, what's not. I also like to know textures, because especially with the neurodivergent population, they might have some very specific ideas about what they like and don't like whether they like crunchy or mushy or salty or sweet, or, all that stuff goes into play. So I don't want to say to someone, well, let's introduce carrots and celery if they don't like crunchy food. That's not going to work. So you got to know what they're willing to start with. And then implementing changes, helping them to make healthier choices, removing foods, and then determining ultimately what their supplemental needs are. Notice that supplemental needs are the very last one. Number 6 out of 6, number 6. We're going to always start with food, particularly as practitioners. It may be out of our scope of practice to suggest any kind of supplement. So we can talk about what the research shows. We can talk about what we do for ourselves and what we have found to be helpful for ourselves. But we can't say necessarily, you have to know what your scope is in your state, but you probably can't say, go to the store and buy X. But we can say, I know that dark green leafy vegetables have a lot of B vitamins in them. So why don't we see if we can add some of those nutrients, some of those foods to your diet before we start talking about supplements. And of course, I don't know about you guys, and I didn't ask this question, if people are working with low socioeconomic clients or people who are working in food deserts, it becomes even harder to get their needs met. So helping us to help them find the foods and the nutrients that they need is part of all this work as well. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. So I guess there's a lot of people who agree with that and experience that too. So when we're talking about elimination diets, and y'all, thank you for this feedback. Since I can't see your faces and I can't see you nodding and smiling, getting the emojis is nice. It makes me feel connected to you guys sitting out there. So thank you for that. So when it comes to elimination diets, so there are so many choices, and I'm going to go through some of these in a little more detail than others, because some of these are not things that you're going to ever really probably practice unless you're the dietitians that are on this call. But I want everyone to know what these diets are. And if you're partnering with a dietitian, you want to know what it is that they're recommending for your client. You want to try and support your client as best you can. And if your client comes to you and says, hey, I talked to a dietitian or a functional doctor and they put me on this diet or that diet, I think it's just nice to know that, you know what it is that they're talking about. So this was looking this was a study that was done in 2017, looking at elimination diets, efficacy and mechanisms in attention deficit and autism. And they found that they were looking at, particularly at excluding things like gluten-free and casein-free diet, which we're about to talk about, and the oligoantigenic diet, which was a restricted diet of hypoallergenic foods that one would eat for 2 to 5 weeks. So they looked at it, and the summary was that there's not enough evidence for the gluten-free, casein-free diet, but that it could be helpful. So, and then they went on to say the main candidate mechanism is the microbiome gut-brain axis, possibly involving complex interactions between multiple systems, including the metabolic, immune, endocrine, and neurosystems. So we conclude with practical implications and future directions into the investigation of elimination diets, efficacy in the treatment of attention deficit and autism. So we're going to talk a lot about the gut-brain axis because that's not something most of us learned in school. but it is an important piece of the work that we need to do. So the first, and the reason that we're, when we talk about, I probably should have said this at the very beginning, when we talk about nutrition, and we are talking about the gut, the reason that it is so important is because the brain, and the last time I checked, was connected to the body. And so information, now we know, flows from the body to the brain, right? Seems like a simple thing, but when you think about Freud and Jung and all of those wonderful people who started this field for us, they were looking at our biopsychosocials, right? They were looking at who raised you and whether you were jealous of your, mother or your father, or, all those different things. And we weren't really looking at the connection between the brain and the body. And there's a huge connection. And so, and every single cell, every single part of our body, we get from the food that we eat. So food is foundational, completely, in my mind, one of the most important things that we and tools that we have to work with our clients. So this is the comprehensive elimination diet. Basically, you remove just these foods. These are foods that are the most common that people are sensitive to. And so you remove them for about 90 days, and meaning 90 days or more, because it takes that long for the gut to rejuvenate and heal. And then you put them back in one at a time. And you'll see that these are so you remove corn, dairy, eggs, gluten, sugar, shellfish, soy, arrowroot, which I know a lot of people don't use arrowroot. I happen to cook with it, but most people don't. Coffee, tea, and chocolate. And then you eat fruit, healthy oils, lean meat, legumes, nuts and seeds, vegetables, and non-gluten grains like quinoa, amaranth, millet, and buckwheat. And so take the foods out for 90 days or more, add in one at a time. And when you add in a food, you add it in a big way. So let's say you decide you're going to add in corn. So the day you're going to add in corn, your client is going to eat corn all day long. It's not just one serving. They're going to have corn with all their meals, which is pretty easy to do because corn's in a bunch of stuff. And then you wait. You wait to see how they feel. So we'll talk about sensitivities later, but just suffice it to say, sensitivities can take up to 72 hours to show up. So when somebody adds something back in that they have removed, you have to wait that 72 hours and see if that food has any kind of reaction with that person, or the person has a reaction with the food, I should say. If they don't, then they can keep that food in. If they do, then they need to keep it out. They can try it again in another month, but they probably need to keep it out for more than putting it in. As long as as long as there's not an issue, they can just keep adding back in. But this helps people to eliminate those big ones. There are tests that can be done, and we'll talk about that later, but this is one way of doing it. I find that a lot of times when I introduce this to my clients, they don't really want to do it because it's a process. It takes a while. Gluten-free, casein-free. This is one of the more popular diets, especially when it comes to people with ADHD and autism. And so gluten is the protein that is in wheat, barley, and rye, and it helps our bread to stick together. It also gives it that sort of fluffy, gluey, it literally means glue, texture that we like so much. And so when somebody is going gluten-free, they need to eliminate baked goods with wheat, barley, or rye, soy sauce, although now you can buy gluten-free soy sauce, and I use tamari. I've been gluten-free for 14 years. I do not have celiac. I've been tested several times, but I do have a sensitivity that has also shown up several times. So I can't eat it, which is fine. Well, I should say I can't eat it here in the US. I can eat it in Europe. Our wheat is different than the wheat in Europe. And so last summer when I went to Greece, I ate baklava, I ate breadsticks, I ate bread dipped in olive oil. I had the best time ever. No stomach aches, no issues whatsoever. But when I come back here, even when I eat just a little by accident, I end up with these terrible stomach aches. So also sauces at restaurants frequently will have wheat in them because they use it as a thickener. So when you're teaching people how to become gluten-free, they need to learn how to ask questions. Now, the good news is, like 14 years ago, when I had to go gluten-free, very few people knew what it was. And if you went to a restaurant, if I would go to a restaurant, I would say, I'm gluten-free. The server's eyes would like glaze over, and I would say, could you go ask the chef, or, go, because then they'll look, either they make the food there and they'll know, or they've got a label that they can look at. But now, if I say I'm gluten-free, some restaurants, the servers are amazing. Like they'll start rattling off all this stuff. I go to my favorite Chinese restaurant in my neighborhood. When I go there, if I order something, he'll look at me because it's always the same guy. He owns the restaurant. He always takes our order. I was there for lunch the other day with a colleague, and I ordered something, and he looked at me and he said, now, that's not gluten-free. And I said, oh, okay, well, then I need to change it up. So restaurants are really good now. Sometimes they even have a gluten-free menu, or they'll have it marked gluten-free on the one menu that they do offer. So it gets very easy. But our clients are not always good at this. This is something we have to help them with, because if they are neurodivergent and they have social anxiety, they don't want to make a fuss. They don't want to ask, they don't want to do, but if they don't, then they can eat something that can be damaging to their gut and can cause them to feel bad. So we have to be aware that, when you say to one of your clients, be sure when you go to a restaurant, because I've done this, like, just be sure when you go to a restaurant that you make sure that you're not eating gluten. And they'll be like, oh, I can't do that. So we have to work with them on that anxiety and help them to be able to advocate for themselves. Alternatives, there are tons of gluten-free products out there. There are gluten-free breads, pancakes, waffles, blah, 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 you name it. They make it gluten-free. That doesn't mean it's good for you. In fact, I don't eat any of those products because they are just full of like rice and starch and tapioca, and just sends your insulin, skyrocketing. So I don't eat that stuff. But for our clients who are transitioning from being gluten-free, gluten eaters to gluten-free, I think those transitional foods I call them transitional foods, can be really helpful. And then they can also learn how to use like lettuce for wraps, or I don't eat sandwiches. So anything that someone would put on two pieces of bread, I put on a salad. So I don't eat, even deli meat. I'll buy deli meat for the week, and I'll make a big salad, and I'll just put the salad in a container to take to the office, and I'll just shred the deli meat on top. And I'll eat it that way. I don't need to eat a sandwich. So there are lots of ways. And I also have a ton of recipes. I use almond flour, coconut flour, and I make cookies and cakes that are so good that my mother and my son ask for them all the time, and they're not gluten-free. They just like them. So there are some really good recipes. It took me a while to find those recipes, but there are definitely good recipes out there that you or your clients can enjoy if they're gluten-free. So casein-free is the protein that's found in dairy products. And so when somebody is going to take casein out of their diet, and a lot of times gluten and casein go together, those sensitivities go together. And by the way, if somebody is sensitive to something, it's probably one of the foods that they like to eat the most. Bread was like my go-to food. I love bread. And when I was a binge eater, because I have a history of some of that in my background, that was what I used to binge on. So when I get a client who comes in and says their favorite food is mac and cheese, I'm already thinking gluten-free, casein-free, okay? It's not always the case. Like, I am gluten-free, but I do eat cheese. I can't eat it every day. If I eat it every day, I will get sick. But if I eat it now and then, I don't have a problem with it at all. So your clients, N equals 1, your clients will have to figure out what works for them. But casein is the protein that is found in dairy products. And usually people will know that they are feeling better without dairy. I have here within 2 weeks, but really it's almost right away. Because if you get somebody who is eating cheese, like I find people love cheese, love, love, love cheese. If you ask them to give up their cheese, they would rather not. But they also don't realize that they're always bloated, they're always gassy, their bowel movements aren't great, whatever. And they never put the 2 and 2 together, that has to do with the casein. And so the minute that they take the dairy products out, if they're one of those people that eats dairy all the time, every day, soon as they take it out, within a day or 2, they're going to know. They're going to start feeling better, and they'll be reporting that. But so it's not the same as gluten, because gluten actually damages the gut lining. And so that's why it takes 3 months before you can reintroduce it. But with casein, 2 weeks or less, people will start feeling some relief. So foods that they need to avoid are anything that has milk. So cow's milk, cheese from cow's milk, ice cream from cow's milk, sauces that are made with cow's milk, etc. But there are so many alternatives out there. So really easy to get by with things like almond milk, coconut milk, soy milk. There are cheeses and ice creams that are made from these milks. You can eat sorbets. Goat and sheep milk and cheese also are tolerated because they have a different kind of protein in them. So the cow's milk that we have in our country are made from these black and white cows, and those are Holstein cows. And the protein that they make is an A1 protein. But brown cows, the all brown cows, are Jersey cows, and those cows and goats make an A2 protein. And the A2 protein is often tolerated much better than the A1 protein. So if your clients can find a Jersey cow, if they can find Jersey cow milk, and I've been told that it is in some stores, you just have to read the labels, then they might be able to tolerate that. I also think that some people tolerate raw milk, even if they don't tolerate pasteurized milk. Raw milk is hard to find. It's illegal in some states, like it's illegal in Georgia to sell raw milk to humans. So I used to buy my raw milk from a farmer who had a refrigerated truck, and he would drive around different parts of our community, and he would post it on his website where he was going to be on any given day. And then you could go line up and you could buy, he didn't sell just milk, he sold other products too, but you could buy your raw milk from him. But when I got the label the first time, it was an animal food label. So you'll see like crude fat, and I forget how it doesn't read, like if you look at dog or cat food, it reads differently. Their label of nutrients reads different than our labels do. And so that's what the milk label was, but everybody was there to buy it for themselves, and everybody knew that, but you had to say you were there for your animal. So if you know somebody, if you can find a farmer who knows what they're doing, raw milk is delicious, and it's good for you, and it often is well tolerated, even when pasteurized milk is not. The paleo diet, it is a pretty popular diet where you eat meat, eggs, fruit, vegetables, nuts and seeds, herbs, and healthy oils, and you avoid processed foods, legumes, grains, dairy, soft drinks, and sugar. You also would avoid artificial sweeteners, trans fats, which were banned a few years ago anyway, and vegetable oils. This is a pretty easy diet to do. I have eaten this way before, although I did move the legumes into the foods to include category, because in my mind, they're a plant, and why not? So I would eat the legumes, but if you're going to do true paleo, they leave the legumes out. Specific carbohydrate is a very restrictive diet that is grain-free. It's to help people with conditions like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, celiac, diverticulitis, cystic fibrosis, and chronic diarrhea. It was developed by a woman named Elaine Gottschall, and she wrote a book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle, Intestinal Health Through Diet. I think she had a child that was sick, and she developed this diet to treat her child. It's good for taking care of some of these things, but it is restrictive. These are some other diets that other people might look at. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them, but you can see that I've got a link here for you to look at low phenols. So looking at phenols occur in fruits and like apples and grapes and berries, and then also chemicals added to foods like BHT, BTHQ, and BHA. So you would be removing those things, and eventually you would want to put those foods back in, like the apples and grapes and berries are all good foods, and they're easy foods for kids in particular to munch on, like on the go, and adults too, for that matter. So, anytime you remove something, unless it's something like gluten where it's causing damage to the system, you hopefully want to let the system heal and then reintroduce those foods. You can't always do it, but sometimes you can. Low amines occur when proteins break down. Aged, overcooked, or processed meats can be high in amines, and grilling, browning, and charring increases the amines where steaming or microwaving does not. And ripening fruit also increases the amine content. Also, when you do grilling, you know how you get those beautiful black lines on your steak or your chicken? Those black lines is where the proteins have consolidated with the sugars, and those can be carcinogenic if you eat a lot of it. And we're heading into grilling season, so just want to mention that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't grill. You absolutely should grill. It's good for you and it's fun. There are ways of marinating meat so that it doesn't interact with the flames the same way. If anybody is interested, I have a handout on that. I was going to say one more thing about that. What was it? Oh, vegetables. When you grill vegetables and you get those same black lines, or fruit, it doesn't do the same thing. It's only with the meat. Okay. Low salicylates. Salicylate is a chemical found in plants like berries, avocados, pine nuts, cauliflower, apples, mushrooms, coffee. And salicylates is what salicylic acid is what aspirin is made of. So some people are sensitive to these particular foods and need to take them out. And low glutamate can be an excitatory neurotransmitter. Sometimes we add it to food in the form of MSG, and we'll talk about that later. It can also be found in some of these other foods. So for some people, they need to lower their amount of glutamate. Low histamine, foods that have histamines are these fermented foods. So again, fermented foods can be really good for you. We're going to talk about that. But also can create problems for some people. So like sushi, I recently learned is a histamine food. And I have also learned that I can no longer eat that. Unfortunately, I can eat these other foods, but I can't eat sushi anymore. It makes me sick. Low oxalate, foods that are high in oxalates. You can see this list here. So again, these are foods that a lot of times people are saying, I eat really healthy, and they do. They're eating all these foods, but it may be that at that point in time in their lives, their bodies are not happy with those particular foods. With low lectin, avoiding whole wheat, nightshades, and legumes. We'll talk about that nightshades later in more detail. Diet and hyperactivity. So Dr. Ben Feingold was a California allergist, and he suggested that salicylates, artificial colors, and artificial food colors were the cause of hyperactivity. And so he created this whole diet called the Feingold diet. You can still find it online. They still print their booklets. They still have a Feingold organization. There are lots of parents who swear by this diet, but there's not a lot of research to support it just yet. But again, N equals 1, as I said before. And so if some people take these foods out and their kids do better, then that's great. And I'm going to show you, I think on Friday, the research on red dye 40 and how it has progressed from the early to, I think it's 2008 all the way till now. And you'll see how our thinking about, or actually, I think the first slide is from like 1980. So I'll show you how the research has progressed on that. So that takes us to 11 o'clock. So we are going to go on a break. So I'll see you guys in